It is 1895. We are deep in the rainforest of Central Africa, in the basin of the Congo River. The heat is heavy. It smells of damp earth and smoke. Usually, a village here is a place of noise. Children laughing, women grinding grain, men talking, but today there is only a terrible, heavy silence. A young woman named Boali hides in the thick leaves at the edge of her village. Her heart beats fast against her ribs. She watches a group of men in blue uniforms. They are soldiers, Africans like her, but they work for men from across the sea. They carry long black rifles. The soldiers are angry. The village did not bring enough sap from the rubber trees this week. They did not meet their quota. Boali sees her neighbor, a man who was once a strong hunter, being pulled into the center of the village. He is crying. He is begging. A soldier lifts a heavy whip made of dried hippopotamus hide. The whip is called a shikot. It is sharp, like a knife made of leather. Then something worse happens. A soldier takes a machete. He does not kill the man. Instead, he holds the man's right hand against a wooden log. With one swift blow, the hand is gone. The soldier drops the hand into a small basket. He needs to show it to his white officer later. He needs to prove that he did not waste his bullets on hunting animals. He must prove he used his power to punish those who did not work hard enough. Boali watches as the soldiers move toward the children. She realizes that in this forest, human life is no longer worth anything. A human hand is now more valuable than the person it belongs to. Why is this happening? Who is the man thousands of miles away? Who is getting rich from this blood? Tonight, we tell the story of the Congo Free State. This is not a story of a country. It is the story of a crime. Europe before the crime. To understand what happened in Congo, we must look at Europe in the late 1800s. Europe was changing fast. This was the age of the Industrial Revolution. Smoke poured out of factories in London, Paris, and Berlin. Steam engines pulled trains across continents. Science was making the world feel smaller. But Europe was also hungry. It was hungry for resources. It needed coal, iron, and oil. And it wanted something more: empire. In those days, European leaders believed that a country's greatness was measured by how much land it owned. They looked at the map of Africa. To them, it looked like a giant cake that had not been sliced yet. They called Africa the Dark Continent, not because the skin of the people was dark, but because Europeans were in the dark about what was there. Thick forests and diseases had stopped them from exploring the interior of Africa. They did not see the ancient kingdoms, the complex cultures, or the millions of families already living there. They only saw a blank space on a map. There was a feeling of a scramble. Every king and prime minister wanted a piece of Africa. They claimed they wanted to bring civilization and trade, but behind these polite words was a simple, cold desire for gold and power. Who was King Leopold II? In the small country of Belgium, there sat a man who felt trapped: Leopold II. Leopold II was the son of King Leopold I, a German prince who became the first king of the Belgians in 1831. He was a model king, popular and wise. King Leopold I was a man who worked very hard to make Belgium, a brand new and tiny country, feel important. He passed this pressure down to his son. Leopold II grew up feeling that being the king of a small, neutral country like Belgium was like wearing a suit that was 3 sizes too small. Leopold's childhood was cold and lonely. His father was often busy with politics. His mother, Queen Louise Marie, was the daughter of the King of France. She was kind, but she died when Leopold was only 15 years old. Leopold was a tall, awkward teenager. He walked with a slight limp and was very shy. His father was disappointed in him, calling him the little tyrant because of his stubborn nature. He never liked school, only concentrating on geography. He didn't have many friends. Instead of playing, he spent his time studying maps and reading about how other countries got rich through their colonies. He developed a second son syndrome, a deep need to prove he was better and more powerful than people thought. In 1853, when he was 18, his father arranged a marriage for him. He married Marie Henriette, an archduchess from Austria. It was a disaster from the start. They were opposites. Marie Henriette loved horses, the outdoors, and music. Leopold loved money, politics, and talking about business opportunities. On their honeymoon, it is said they barely spoke. They lived separate lives in the same palace. They had 4 children, 3 daughters and 1 son, also named Leopold III. King Leopold II became the King of Belgium in 1865 after his father died. Family-wise, King Leopold II had only 1 heir, his son, young Leopold III. The king put all his hopes for the future into this boy. But in 1869, tragedy struck. The 9-year-old prince fell into a pond at the royal palace. He caught a cold that turned into a deadly heart infection. For months, the boy suffered. The king, usually cold and distant, was seen crying at his son's bedside. When the boy died, Leopold II was heartbroken. But not just as a father. He was angry as a king. He no longer had a male heir to carry on his name. After the funeral, he became even colder. He turned his back on his wife and daughters. He decided that if he could not have a family legacy, he would build a legacy of wealth. He once told a German emperor, "There is really nothing left for us kings except money." As he got older, Leopold became a man of strange habits. He was obsessed with hygiene. He refused to shake hands with people because he was afraid of germs. He grew a massive white beard which he kept in a rubber bag at night to keep it clean. While he pretended to be a religious and moral leader to the public, his private life was scandalous. In his 60s, he began a relationship with a 16-year-old girl named Blanche Delacroix, who had been a prostitute. He gave her titles and riches even while his own daughters were struggling or kept in gilded cages by his strict rules. He was a man who controlled everything: his country, his children, and eventually millions of people in Africa, with a heart of ice. The birth of the Congo Free State. Leopold began a giant public relations campaign. He organized a great meeting in Brussels in 1876. He invited famous explorers and famous people. He told them, "We must open the only part of our globe where Christianity has not yet penetrated. We must pierce the darkness." He created an organization called the International African Association. It sounded like a charity, like the Red Cross. He told the world his goal was to stop the slave trade and to help Africans learn about trade and science. It was a lie. Now we see how Leopold used his royal family name and his sharp mind to pull off the greatest trick in history. He did not use an army to get Congo. He used a pen, a briefcase, and a mountain of lies. Leopold knew that if he asked for a colony as the King of Belgium, The other big countries, Britain and France, would say no. They did not want a new competitor. So Leopold acted as a private citizen. He hired a famous explorer named Henry Morton Stanley. Stanley was a tough, often cruel man who had become famous for finding the lost missionary David Livingstone. Leopold paid Stanley to go to the Congo and do something very specific: buy the land. Stanley traveled up the massive Congo River. He met with hundreds of local African chiefs. Because the chiefs did not speak English or French, and Stanley did not speak their languages, there was no real communication. Stanley would give the chiefs pieces of bright cloth, bottles of alcohol, or cheap trinkets. In return, he made them sign contracts. These chiefs thought they were signing friendship treaties or trade agreements. In reality, the papers said they were giving away their land, their labor, and their lives to Leopold forever. While Stanley was buying the jungle, Leopold was busy in Europe. He started telling everyone that he was worried about the illegal slave trade carried out by Arab traders in East Africa. He told the world, "I want to spend my own money to save the Africans." In 1884, the powerful leaders of Europe met in Berlin. This was the Berlin Conference. This meeting was called to make sure the European countries didn't go to war with each other over African land. They sat around a table and drew lines on a map of Africa. One of the main players at the conference was King Leopold. Leopold was a master of divide and rule. He told the Americans that the Congo would be a place of total free trade, no taxes. He told the British that if they didn't give the Congo to him, France might take it. He told the French that if they didn't give it to him, Britain might take it. The leaders were tricked. They decided that the best neutral option was to give this giant piece of land to Leopold's charity organization, an area 76 times larger than Belgium. On February 5th, 1885, the Congo Free State was born. They did not call it a colony, it was a free state. The name was a cruel joke. It was not free, and it was not a state. It was the world's largest private plantation. It belonged entirely to one man, Leopold. No one was there to check his power. No parliament, no elections, just Leopold and his greed. Leopold was now a double king. In Brussels, he was the king of the Belgians, bound by laws and a parliament. But in Congo, he was the absolute sovereign. There was no government in the Congo. There were no judges to stop him. There was only Leopold's will. He owned every tree, every animal, and every person. He had created a country that was actually a private business, and he was the CEO with total power. At first, Leopold's business was failing. He was spending a lot of money building a railway and paying soldiers, but he wasn't making a profit. He was almost bankrupt. Lucky for him, the bicycle craze hit Europe and America. Then first cars were invented. Suddenly, the world needed one thing more than anything else: rubber. Rubber comes from the sap of vines and trees. The Congo was full of these vines. They grew high up in the trees of the thick jungle. Leopold saw his chance. The price of rubber went up and up. Leopold realized he was sitting on a gold mine. He stopped pretending to be a charity worker and became a slave driver. He divided the land among private companies. He told them, "Get me rubber. I don't care how you do it." To get that rubber, Leopold needed a massive amount of labor. He didn't want to pay for it, so he invented a system of terror. He introduced the quota system, and this is how the system worked. Each village was given a quota. a specific amount of rubber they had to collect every week. But collecting rubber was dangerous and difficult. You had to climb high into the trees, slash the vines, and let the white sap drip onto your body. This was easier than using a collecting pot from tall trees. It would dry on your skin, and when you peeled it off, it would take your hair and skin with it. Very inhuman. If the rubber was dirty or wet, or if there wasn't enough, the punishments began. The people of the Congo did not want to do this. They had their own farms to mind. They had families to feed, but they had little choice. Leopold created a private army called the Force Publique. The officers were white men, mostly from Belgium, but also from other parts of Europe, who wanted to get rich or were looking for adventure. The soldiers were often Africans who had been kidnapped as children and raised in military camps, or men from distant tribes who had no sympathy for the local people. Others, soldiers, were recruited from other West African countries. To force the men to work, Leopold's soldiers, the Force Publique, would enter a village. They would kidnap the women and the children. They would put them in cages or hostage houses. They told the men, if you want your wife back, if you want your children to live, go into the forest and find rubber. Do not come back until you have enough. Many women died of hunger or disease while they were hostages. Many men worked until they dropped dead of exhaustion in the forest, trying to save their families. But the most famous horror was the severing of hands. As we mentioned in the opening, the white officers were worried their soldiers would use their bullets to hunt for food or keep them for a rebellion. So for every bullet fired, the soldier had to bring back a severed human hand to prove he had used the bullet to punish a rebel. This led to soldiers cutting off the hands of living people, children, as women, and men, just to satisfy the officers' paperwork. Sometimes, a village that couldn't meet its rubber quota would be attacked, and the soldiers would bring back baskets of hands to the officers as proof that they were doing their job. Baskets of smoked dried hands became a kind of currency in the Congo. Sometimes soldiers would raid villages just to collect hands so they could be promoted. It was horror beyond words. Life inside the horror. Imagine you are a father in a village along the river. In the past, you fished and grew yams. Now you spend all day in the jungle. You are starving because you have no time to grow food. Your wife is being held in a camp 10 miles away. You do not know if she is alive. If you come back with a basket that is half full, the soldier laughs. He ties you to a post. He hits you with the shikot whip. 10 lashes, 20 lashes, 100 lashes. Your back becomes raw meat. Many men died from these whippings. If you run away, the soldiers burn your village. They kill your elders. The white officers lived in comfortable houses. They drank wine and listened to music, while just a few hundred yards away, the smell of burning villages filled the air. They saw the Congolese people not as humans, but as labor units. To live in the Congo under Leopold's rule was to live in a world where the laws of humanity had been deleted. Every person, from the youngest child to the oldest grandmother, was trapped in a machine designed to produce profit. For the men, life became a constant race against death. They were no longer allowed to fish or hunt for their families. They lived in the forest, moving deeper and deeper into the jungle because the rubber vines near the villages had been bled dry. They slept in the mud. They were bitten by insects and exposed to sleeping sickness. If a man fell from a tree and broke his leg, he was often left to die because he was no longer useful. When they did return to their villages, they didn't return to a home. They returned to a prison where they had to hand over their rubber to be weighed by a white agent. If the scale showed even a few grams less than the quota, the whip, the shikot, was waiting. The women suffered a different kind of nightmare. As hostages, they were kept in crowded, filthy pens. They were not given enough food because the men were away in the forest. No one was planting crops. Famine began to spread. Many women were physically abused by the soldiers. They were forced to work for the soldiers, grinding grain and carrying heavy loads. A woman's only hope was that her husband would return with enough rubber to buy her freedom for a few days before the next quota was due. So how many people died? It is a question that haunts historians, because Leopold did not care about the people. He did not keep good records of their deaths. But we know the damage was massive. Some historians estimate that 10 million people died during the time of the Congo Free State. That was about half of the entire population. I will say that again, half the population, 10 of the 20 million estimated population of Congo. Perhaps the saddest part of the collapse was the falling birth rate. In many areas, the trauma was so great and the families so broken that people stopped having children. There was no hope for a future, so the population began to shrink rapidly. This was not a war in the traditional sense. It was a mass disappearance caused by greed. The world begins to notice. For a long time, Leopold kept his secret. He paid newspapers to write good things about him. He told the world he was building schools. But the truth is like water. It eventually finds a way out. The truth began to leak out through two groups, missionaries and a whistleblower. The first person to speak up was an African-American man named George Washington Williams. He traveled to the Congo expecting to see a paradise. Instead, he saw the heart of darkness. He wrote an open letter to Leopold, accusing him of crimes against humanity. He was the first person to use that famous phrase. Some missionaries went to the Congo to preach, but they stayed to document. Men like William Shepherd, an African-American Presbyterian, and Alice Seeley Harris, an Englishwoman, saw the horrors with their own eyes. Alice Seeley Harris did something revolutionary. She brought a Kodak camera. She took pictures of the victims. She knew that words could be ignored, but a photograph of a father looking at the severed hand of his child could not be denied. These photos were the social media of the 1900s. They went viral across the world. Then came Edmund Morel. He was a young man working for a shipping company in England. He stood on the docks in Belgium and watched the ships coming from Congo. He noticed something strange. The ships arrived full of valuable rubber and ivory. But when the ships went back to Congo, they were not carrying trade goods. They were not carrying cloth or food. They were carrying only soldiers and thousands of crates of guns and bullets. Morel realized this is not trade. This is a slave state. Morel quit his job and began a crusade. He started a newspaper called the West African Mail. He spoke to thousands of people. He became Leopold's greatest nightmare. He used facts, figures, and those terrible photographs to show the world that the Congo Free State was a giant crime scene. He joined forces with a man named Roger Casement, who traveled deep into the Congo to take testimonies from survivors. They used photography. These images shocked the world. People in London, New York, and even Brussels began to protest. It was the first time in history that people from different countries united to fight for the human rights of people they had never met in a land they had never seen. They called Leopold a monster. Mark Twain, the famous American writer, wrote a biting satire called King Leopold's Soliloquy, where the king complains that the camera is his greatest enemy. End of the Congo Free State. King Leopold II did not give up easily. He was a billionaire with a kingdom at his disposal. When E. de Morel and the missionaries began their campaign, Leopold fought back with everything he had. Leopold created a press bureau in Brussels. Its only job was to lie. He paid journalists in Germany, France, and even the United States to write articles saying that the stories of severed hands were fake. He claimed the photographs were staged by his enemies. He even sent a commission of inquiry, a group of judges, to Congo, thinking he could control them. But when the judges arrived and saw the hollow eyes of the survivors and the piles of bones, they couldn't lie. They returned to Europe in shock. Their report confirmed the horrors. When he knew he was losing, he ordered his offices in the Congo to be burned, getting rid of all the evidence. The fires lasted for 8 days. In 1908, the pressure became too great. The international community forced Leopold to give up his private colony. The Belgian government finally stepped in. They told the king he must hand over the Congo. But Leopold didn't just give it away. He sold it. He made the Belgian people pay him 50 million francs to thank him for his services. He also forced them to take on 110 million francs of his personal debt. He walked away with a fortune even as his victims lay in unmarked graves. The Congo Free State became the Belgian Congo. King Leopold II's personal rule over Congo, known as the Congo Free State, lasted for 23 years from 1885 to 1908. He never stepped foot in the Congo during his reign. Did things get better? A little. The mass killings and the cutting of hands stopped, but the system of exploitation remained. The Congolese people still had no rights. Their land was still being robbed of its gold, copper, and diamonds. They were still treated as second-class citizens in their own home. Leopold died in 1909 at 74 years old, 1 year after losing Congo. He died one of the richest men in the world. At his funeral, the people of Brussels hissed and booed as his golden coffin passed by. They knew finally what he had done. The king sovereign was buried in a cloud of shame. Long-term impact on Congo. Here is what happened in the years that followed. The most famous atrocities stopped. The Belgian government was embarrassed by the photos of severed hands. They banned the force publique from cutting off limbs and ended the hostage-taking system. However, the force publique was not disbanded. It simply became the official colonial army. The whip, shikot, was still used and Congolese people were still forced to work. The difference was that it was now legal and organized under Belgian law. Under Leopold, the focus was on rubber. Under the Belgian government, the focus shifted to the ground. Congo is one of the richest places on earth for minerals. Huge companies were formed to dig for copper, gold, diamonds, uranium. The uranium used in the atomic bombs during World War II actually came from a mine in Congo. The Congolese people became a massive labor force for these mines. They were moved from their villages to live in company towns. While they were fed better than under Leopold, they were still not free. They were treated like children who had to obey their Belgian parents. The Belgian philosophy was very different from the British or French. The Belgians believed in primary education for many, but higher education for none. They built many primary schools and clinics. In fact, and by the 1950s, Congo had one of the highest literacy rates in Africa. But the Belgians strictly forbade Congolese people from going to university or becoming doctors, lawyers, or army officers. They did this on purpose. They believed that if Africans became too educated, they would start wanting independence. As a result, in 1960, a country of 14 million people had fewer than 30 university graduates. By the late 1950s, a wave of independence was moving across Africa. In 1959, massive riots broke out in the capital city, Leopoldville, now Kinshasa. The Belgians panicked. They didn't want a long, expensive war like the French were fighting in Algeria. So they did something shocking. They gave the Congo independence in just 6 months. They left a country that had a massive modern economy for minerals, a well-trained labor force, but almost zero people trained to run a government, a court system, or an army. On June 30th, 1960, the Congo became independent. The first prime minister was a brilliant young man named Patrice Lumumba. In his first speech, with the Belgian king sitting right next to him, Lumumba spoke the truth. He talked about the humiliating slavery and the tears and fire of the colonial years. The Belgians never forgave him. Within weeks, the country fell into chaos. The army rebelled, provinces tried to break away, and the Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union moved in. Lumumba was eventually murdered with the help of Belgian and American spies. For the next 32 years, a dictator named Mobutu Sese Seko ruled the country. He stole billions of dollars, becoming a black Leopold in many ways, while his people stayed poor. The Congo is still struggling today with war and poverty, despite being so rich in resources. This is not because the people are unproductive. It is because for 80 years, from 1885 to 1960, the country was built to be a giant mine, not a home for its people. Today, there are no monuments to the millions who died in the forest. Their names are mostly forgotten, their hands are long gone. But history is not just about remembering the kings cast and the winners. It is about remembering the truth. We tell this story so that the silence of those villages is finally broken. We tell it so that we recognize the Leopolds of our own time. The Congo River still flows wide and deep. It carries the memories of 1 million broken hearts. And it reminds us that the most valuable thing on earth is not rubber or gold or power. It is the simple, quiet dignity of a human life.